I want to take a second and start talking about the fundamentals of defensive scheme today. The fundamentals of defensive scheme that kind of give your identity as far as what your defense is are the following things, as you can see up here. Front, contain and edge philosophy, assignment and gap responsibility, coverages as far as pass coverages, blitzes, and then separate stunts and slants, which may or may not be something that you'll do. All right, let's quickly switch screens here. All right, so when we're talking about front, first of all is just referring to the number of people that you put on the line of scrimmage. Fronts are either odd or even, depending upon the number of people you have on the line of scrimmage. And when we talk about an even front, generally we're talking about something that's a 4-3. Whoops, sorry. We're talking about a 4-3 or something of that like. And we can see, let's see if that'll come up here. 4-3. All right. So this is a 4-3. Now it's a little bit off. We'll move these guys into position here. But this would be an example of an even front. We have 4 down linemen, 3 backers, obviously, and you'll obviously hear some other different front names or different defense names, whether it's 5-2, 4-4 stack, a 3-4, which you'll see, ran in the college level and sometimes at the high school level. So that's basically what we're referring to when we're talking about your front. But we're referring to these 4 linemen up here. That gives us our even front. Now there is also odd fronts. Odd fronts are examples of odd fronts are 5-2s, 5-3s, which is a fairly common one. This is just a 5-2 here. Obviously this wouldn't be our exact alignment, but something like this with this as well is something that we would like to look in, and that's our front. Now what decides what front you're going to be in, it can really vary depending upon what you want to do, depending upon who you've got for your personnel. I think that's the biggest decision-making factor when you're deciding what defense you're going to run is who we have, and do we have the big guys up front to stuff the holes. I prefer an odd front that puts 5 men on the line of scrimmage in Little League. And I guess I should hit this. There is also the 6-man front that is used from time to time. It's not super common, but you sometimes see it. So those are the important things to know as far as front goes. The next thing we'll do is we'll talk about edge philosophy. Now, edge philosophy for us refers to the way that we try to play the edge. Many defenses will go ahead and give that responsibility to defensive ends, and their belief is that they are going to come upfield and create a barrier. Now, that's okay as long as your defensive ends go ahead and create a barrier right here at the edge of the line. But what we see happening a lot with defensive ends is defensive ends will tend to go a little bit further upfield, and they end up right here. Well, if you end up right here, you've created quite the running lane for your running backs or for the opposing running backs to run through right here. So that's something you need to be aware of. Penetration-based containment is scary a little bit in my mind. What we would prefer to do is have some defender that's responsible to prevent the other team from getting to the edge. Now you can do that with your defensive lineman like we talked about, and we've got that right here, but you can also do that with your linebackers. Sometimes people will tell, say for example you run a 5-3 here, you might have an extra linebacker come down and play the edge. It's just important that you understand on any given play who is the guy responsible for that edge containment. Edge play is a huge part of successful defensive scheming, and you can do it 100 different ways, but you've got to make sure that that player understands that they've got to stay home for reverses, that they've got to make sure that they've got the width to box things in, and they understand that their job is to turn the play back primarily either into their teammates or to the sideline, and those are their kind of 2 responsibilities. The next fundamental that we'll talk about is alignment and gap responsibility. And the only thing that I really have to say about alignment and gap responsibility is we need to make sure that we're plugging every hole. if we were to look at this defense here, we've got 7 holes here. If we bring a tight end, that creates an 8th. But for our purposes now, let's just go ahead and look at this. Gap responsibility, let's say I've given edge responsibility to my end. I'm going to go ahead and have this player play this gap. I would like this player to play strong A, this player to play weak B, this player again to play edge philosophy. I want this player to stuff weak A, and I want this player to stuff weak C. You can see what I've done is essentially plugged all the holes. As a defense, our job is to kill the daylight. Daylight's kind of our enemy for the opposing running backs. In that way, if I've aligned correctly and I've owned my gap and I've not got moved out of my gap, this team shouldn't have anything to do offensively. So that's something to take into account. Let's go ahead and delete this real quick here. Okay. Let's go ahead and move on to the next one, which is coverages. Now there's a couple different types of coverages. The one that I would recommend most readily that most of you guys will probably use, I'm going to switch the front on here for you, is probably a cover 3. Most of us probably play a 3 deep shell, and what I mean by that is we have a corner, a safety, and another corner behind. When we divide the field up into cover 3, we go ahead and say there's a deep third here, there's a deep third here, and there's a deep third here. And we're basically telling these players that on your read of pass, your job is to get to your zone and make the stop. Now underneath, when we're playing cover 3, and this can be difficult depending upon how old your kids are, but we're telling them that there are 4 underneath zones. If we think about the reality of most of the passing game in Little League football, quarterbacks aren't necessarily going to push us deep at the lower levels. Now at the older levels, you may have to account for a guy who can push deep, and you might move an extra safety into the game depending upon who you're playing. But the same thing applies here. As soon as the linebacker's understood that it's a pass, he's got his read, he's going to go here. This linebacker's going to go here in the hook to curl. This linebacker's going hook to curl as well, and this linebacker will cover flats again. So the important things about coverages is just keep everything in front. I think that's a very basic defensive tenet that we sometimes lose sight of. But if we can do that correctly, we're going to save ourselves a lot of heartburn down the road. All right, blitzes, I'm not going to go too in-depth to that. I think we understand what a blitz is. I'm going to go ahead and delete this, and we'll go ahead and just delete our underneath coverages. But blitzes is the basic idea of bringing a linebacker, automatically sending them up into the play and blitzing them through. So, for example, I could possibly blitz this linebacker off the edge. I could blitz this linebacker through this gap. You can do any number of blitzes. The one thing you don't want to become is overly dependent upon blitzing. So just make sure that you get your kids the ability to time it up right and hit the hole correctly. Some of the easiest ways to name blitzes are just to name them or tag them with the name of the position. For example, you probably have a Sam backer as your strong backer, Will as your weak backer, and a Mike as your Mike could either be your strong inside backer, and a Mac could be your inside weak side backer. But either way, those guys are good possibility of blitzers. I'm not going to go too heavily into the next one, which is slants and stunts, but I'm just going to suffice it to say that there are things we can do with our linemen wherein we can swap gaps. For example, this is a basic twist here, but that's a little bit technical. It can really mess with teams. I would say definitely make sure you've mastered the basics before you even start worrying about slanting. Kids need to understand where their gap responsibility is. When they are slanting, they need to know, hey, I'm swapping gaps. Now I need to get all the way to the C gap. For example, here with this tackle, he needs to make sure he gets to C gap, whereas this end needs to know, I can't just come in here to B gap. I've got to go all the way down to A. So important things that need to be understood, and I think definitely are a little bit up the higher level of complexities that you'll need to cover with your team. So that is the basics of defense. Really basic stuff, nothing too secret there, but those are the fundamentals of defensive schemes, and those are the things that as coordinators you've kind of got to make some decisions on and decide what you're going to do and how you're going to implement those things. Thanks.